inner plain that he dwelt on was populated by Achilles, Hector, Heracles, the great heroes. And that was what he wanted to do. He wanted to leave a name that would never die, to accomplish things that no one had ever done before.
Popos Mende Impacate, Tuapi de Desmond, Etos Pulus is Kisate.
Women Legason Hote Paisas. To Desmond Kaila Lusta Ife.
Solano to Histora to remove.
Whether or not the story is true, I think it tells us something about the nature of Alexander, his character, that he was willing to look for inventive and new solutions. And even more than that he was driven to succeed.
Historians argue over whether the story of the Gordian knot is true or simply a myth. But there is no debate about Alexander's legendary drive and genius. It would now be tested in one of the most important battles in the history of the ancient world. Alexander is now on a collision course with the Persian Empire. Soon, a battle will begin for control of the known world at a place called Gaugamela. In 334 BC, Alexander led his army of 45,000 men east into the lands claimed by the Empire of Persia. But the invasion was barely noticed by the Persian king.
Darius III was the great king of Persia. He came to the Persian throne in 336 BC.
Darius is told that Alexander and his army have breached Persian soil. The question now is what to do about it.
The Persians want to have an early victory against Alexander. Nip it in the bud. Fight him before he can advance far from where he's landed.
But the Persian strategy backfires. They're defeated at the Battle of Granicus, at the Battle of Issus, and at the Siege of Tyre. As Darius watched the surprising military success of the young general, he began to build up his army.
Many of his advisors said, don't fight regular battles with the Macedonian army. They're simply too good. The risk of losing is too great. Instead, avoid battle and retreat. Let the formidable terrain of Southwest Asia defeat Alexander. Destroy all the food, burn all the crops, give him nothing to eat. And that will go a long way towards defeating him. That kind of policy is very difficult for Darius to follow because he needs to prove himself. And traditionally, a Persian king proves himself by winning battles.
But before a final showdown with Alexander, Darius decided to negotiate instead of fight.
Darius sent several notes to Alexander, offering him peace treaty and various terms.
He told Alexander that if he would stop campaigning, that Darius would give him money, would give him half of his empire that he had already conquered up to that point, and even the hand of his daughter in marriage.
Alexander, in response, is said to have sent back letters saying, in effect, basically, why should I negotiate with you for something which already belongs to me?
Patipur!
Krushiata Vusaraka.
Patipur!
Alejandros Prostalion Grafi. Inayat the Kremeta Katin Korano tu Pasan.
What was at stake at Gaugamela was the entire Persian Empire. If Alexander could bring Darius to battle and defeat him, he would lay honest claim to rule of the Persian Empire.
Kautitaja hijahaka abarana.
Gaugamela cruciata buzarka.
Gaugamela. Atishtai adahan abarang Gaugamela.
Darius had built an army from every corner of his empire, and as the Persian army began to move into place, Greek scouts reported that Darius's army was larger than anything they had ever seen before.
The estimates are actually all over the field, but we suspected he probably had around 200 to 250,000 men on the field, which would have been about 5 times the size of Alexander's force.
The Macedonian army, we think we have fairly certain figures for. We're talking about 40,000 infantry of all types and about 7,000 cavalry.
Alexander's chief general is Parmenio, a seasoned cavalry commander.
Parmenio was one of Philip's most trusted generals. He was also of the old school. He was one of the only generals that regularly stood up and argued with Alexander.
And in some cases, Alexander would ask Parmenio for advice, knowing that he would get a conservative answer from Parmenio. And therefore, he would understand how a conservative commander would view a certain situation. And oftentimes, he would then use that information to develop a plan that would counter a conservative reaction.
The youthful Alexander may not be worried about being outnumbered 5-1, but the old general is. He wants to attack at night, while the enemy sleeps.
Tigar, a pelicanai planastai ke poye ke farme ora Darian.
Igoman an Alexandros, Igoman an es.
Kaigo. I Parmenian en. Aluk ego Parmenian. Klepto teniken. Tupame tupori.
He was arrogant and brash, but he had to be to lead in that kind of an environment.
Darius had expected an attack in the dark and left his army standing at the ready for the entire night. It was not a cohesive force, but a series of armed groups levied from the governors or satraps of every corner of the empire.
The king would go to the satrap and say, your tax this year is 1,000 men. And he might have a huge variety of these from different places. He fought with Ethiopians. He fought with Bactrians, who would be Afghanistan today. They were all over the place, and they may speak different languages, have different cultures, have different weapons.
Most Persian warriors wore no armor and no helmet. Each carried an 8-foot spear and a shield made of wicker. But what the Persian army lacked in armor and weapons, they made up for in numbers.
You think of the Persians, they're not a bunch of yahoos. The tactics that they're using have been effective for hundreds of years. The Persians have a huge empire. It's been good enough.
Against this enormous army, Alexander has one advantage. This professional army has the Macedonian phalanx. Captain Dale Dye, retired officer, historian, and film consultant, has studied the Macedonian approach to warfare.
The Macedonian phalanx, probably the most potent weapon of war in the ancient world. The phalanx, blocks of individuals, 256 men, arranged 16 across by 16 deep.
Once you were in the formation and going forward, you really had no choice as to whether you were going to go backwards or not. You were definitely going forward with this massive wall of human muscle and spear points, and that's what made it so overwhelming.
In the front rank were the most veteran fighters, the fighters who had proved their courage, their bravery on the battlefield, who could be relied on to go forth and contact the enemy.